Caeli. Welcome everybody to Calling All Investors. We have Caeli Ridge here. We're here every Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Pacific, 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My name is Carly, and I would like to welcome John Dingeman here today as well with us as our guest speaker. So thank you so much for joining us and everyone for being here today. I'm going to hand it over to Caeli to do more of an introduction of John, and then we'll get started on today's call. So go for it, Caeli. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Miss Carly. Hey, gang. So good to see you. I know that it's been a couple of weeks. You'll notice that there's a new face here with us, the lovely Carly Libby, who is my right and left hand most days. She is going to be taking over the capable shoes of Larry Bailey going forward. So you'll get to know her a little bit more as the weeks go on. She's new to doing all of this, so we're going to give her all kinds of latitude in figuring out her own style. So thank you, Carly. And then real quickly, guys, a couple of housekeeping things. And I know that I'm going to kind of stall here for a minute because I know that we usually have people that log on in the first few minutes. So I do want to share with you guys something. I've got an announcement, and it's something of kind of it's a little bit awkward, some sad news, but it's important that I give you this information to set expectations for the coming weeks. We had an unexpected death in the family recently, and as a result, through May, the Tuesdays with me are going to be pre-recorded the way they have been the last few weeks. I would love anybody here right now, we'll put a blast out too. If you guys have topics of things that you want to hear about, updates on whatever it is, you guys know that this is a collaborative thing. Please email me directly, cridge@ridgelendinggroup.com. You can email info@ridgelendinggroup.com. You can go to the community. Anything that is pertinent to you, it really doesn't matter if it's lending or not. Real estate investing centered, let me know and I'll do my best to speak on that. Those pre-recorded videos for the next couple of Tuesdays are going to be what you see through the rest of May. I know that's kind of awkward, guys. Sorry, but anyway, that is what that is. And then we'll be back in the swing of things in June. Okay, so let's kick this off. We've got our guest speaker here, John Dingeman. I am so excited about this, and I think we're going to start seeing a lot more people join us here this afternoon. This one I'm particularly jazzed about because we don't have a lot of guest speakers, or we haven't up until now, but this one I think is timely. And we get a lot of questions about appraisal in general. So Mr. John, I did a little bit of sleuth undercover work, and I found what I believe to be somebody that is going to be super competent and capable of kind of giving us some background information, kind of back-end knowledge, and a look under the hood, as I like to say, about the real estate. So let me introduce him properly. I've got a little bio here I'm going to read for you guys. Mr. John Dingeman, he is a chief appraiser. He's responsible for quality control and compliance. This includes appraisal escalations, vendor quality control, client escalations, and mandatory reporting. All of that may or may not mean anything to you guys. It's just that his credentials speak for themselves from my point of view. He's a certified residential appraiser in 11 states, a registered property tax agent in Arizona, and a qualifying and continuing education instructor for multiple course providers in our industry. John is the past president of the National Association of Appraisers and the Coalition of Arizona Appraisers. He's also served on several boards, including Arizona Board of Manufactured Housing, Phoenix Village Planning Committee, Homeowners Association, and charitable organizations supporting foster children in Arizona called Arizona Helping Hands. Please welcome Mr. John Dingeman. He is going to be giving us the overview of what is involved in residential real estate appraising. And I'm going to start with asking him a question. I have a few that I'm going to ask. He's got a deck that he's going to go through. But my first question for you, John, as we get started here, and then Carly, if we turn it over to him, I think that I don't have to do anything because he's co-host. He can just share screen. Okay. John, my first question for you, and this is one that I am personally interested in. How is it that we could have three different appraisers appraising the same property and come up with three different, wildly different, or largely different valuations, right? 100,000, 150, 200,000, whatever it is. How is that possible? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it can be extremely frustrating if you're a reader of the appraisal or the user of an appraisal, right? In that regard. So remember, they are an opinion of value, and just because they're disparate doesn't mean that they're incorrect either, Caeli. So think of it from this perspective. Number one, individual appraisers are measuring properties. One of the reasons why Fannie Mae announced a year ago in April that they were adopting the ANSI standard for measurements was so that appraisers would start to use the same number. In other words, if two appraisers measure a property differently, we're likely to come up with different numbers. The second is we see properties differently, and Fannie and Freddie, who designed the UAD format, which included the condition ratings C1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. They have been at conferences speaking to appraisers over the last 4 or 5 years about the lack of uniformity as it relates to the definitions. So appraisers have, for the lack of a better word, Caeli, they've capitulated to underwriters. They like to use C3 as average. That was never the intent. And again, if you have appraisers that are using different condition ratings, see the property differently, measure the property differently, you're going to come up with different results. And then the larger the value, I suppose. So if you start thinking multi-million-dollar properties, and you have a $2 million versus a 2.5 or a 3 million, it doesn't mean one of them is wrong or both of them are wrong. It means they're leveraging likely, and we'll talk about this, specific comparables, and that's where they're focusing their energy and efforts on and developing that opinion of value. What you'd like to see is some consensus between the two. And so we call that a reconciliation, where we go back to the appraisers and we say, hey, you're missing a fireplace, you're not including these sales, you are, and you start asking them just to consider additional information, make corrections, and then maybe they come to an agreement. And one quick example, Caeli, would be I had two appraisers that were nearly $1 million apart in Beverly Hills in the 90210 zip code in California. And the appraisers were using different comps. Now, what had happened is the appraiser that was at the lower end had reached out to the buyer's agent, who explained everything that was wrong with this property. Think Tom Hanks, Shelley Long, the money pit, right? The other appraiser that was on the high end had spoken to the listing agent, who said, I don't know why you're calling me. It's a move-in ready condition. It's perfectly fine, right? So the comps were based on that selection, and the other appraiser used comps that needed repairs and updating. And so once the appraiser who was at 3 reached out to the buyer's agent and better understood those repairs and the overall condition of the property, then those other sales comparables that were used made more sense, and that value came down. Now, it didn't come down to 2 million, but it came pretty close.
So this brings up a follow-up question, John, before you get into your presentation. As the consumer, and maybe this leads into the other question that I have for you, as the consumer, what is our recourse? How do we reconcile with this? I mean, we've got the option of rebuttal, and you tell me if I'm jumping ahead and you want to handle this later, but in my personal experience, the percentage of times that we have gone in to rebut a value or an appraisal, the likelihood of success, even by $1, is extremely low. So as a consumer, what are our recourses when this happens?
Well, let's cover the recourses as we go through the deck, Caeli.
Okay,
but what I would say is this. The percentage, first of all, the percentage of reconsideration of value, or you'll hear me refer to it as ROV, that are submitted is relatively low today. I mean, it's in the 2% of all appraisals completed receive an ROV request. That's not a lot, right?
Okay.
What I will tell you is once an ROV is submitted, the chance of success, depending on whether it's a refinance or a purchase, is different. And that range is somewhere between 15 and 20, 25% of the time they change. Now, the change is usually rather small. And I think you're less likely, Caeli, to see changes in reports today because of the amount of scrutiny and number of touches an appraisal sees today. So I think appraisers are doing overall a better job of getting that number right, knowing that they have a QC department and an appraisal management company looking at it. They have a processor and a loan originator, maybe some agents, an underwriter, and then post-close and so on, along with ultimately Fannie and Freddie. And they know these reports are being submitted to Fannie, Freddie, FHA, et cetera, through a portal. So they can't be taken away either, right? So
Right,
they're
they're
all
there, they exist, right? The record is there, and it will never go away. Yeah, that's a good point. You touched on something that triggered. I wanted to mention to all of our listeners here today, dispelling some myths about the lender appraiser relationship. I meant to get to this earlier, guys. So real quickly, it's important to recap, and a lot of you over the last year and a half have heard me talk about this. Based on 2008, 2009, the housing and lending crash, the sweeping overhaul, sweeping legislative changes to finance, and in particular in this case appraisal, one of the biggest changes is that the lender, us, are not allowed to have any direct contact with the individual appraiser. So many times, and not necessarily about Ridge, but I hear people talk about, you can't use that lender or this lender because they use bad appraisers. Well, the truth is that we don't even get to speak to the appraiser, let alone choose who the appraiser is going to be. It's a random selection. There's very specific rules and regs within USPAP, HVAC, et cetera. So just FYI, when we start talking about the appraiser work, the lender has no play or even say in what is chosen and how all of that works. So, okay, John, you're up, man. Let's see your stuff.
All right, let's go through it. And just to set the stage for everyone again, I'm looking at a couple of different screens, but I'm going to use some of this. I apologize if I go through it quickly. It's meant to be conversational, at least create talking points, Caeli, as we discussed earlier. So let me just cover valuation insights, appraisal modernization. We'll touch on a couple of different topics, and of course, get to the reconsideration of value also. So it's important as you're looking at a property, understanding what contributes to value. There's an acronym for that. I use DUST. I know that others have others, but it's demand, utility, supply, and transferability. In other words, I look at my daughter and my son-in-law who started a family. They were in a small house by themselves, one bedroom, right? And so as they start this family, they have pets and so on. Well, gee, we need a house, right? We need to get out of this apartment. So what are they looking for? Well, it also has to meet their utility demands. If it's a one bedroom house, that doesn't help them. If it's two, all right, well, we're going to start a family. We think we're going to have at least 2 kids. So let's go with a 3-bedroom house. So 2 bedrooms are off the table. And then, of course, 3-bedroom homes have to be available to them and through sale. So if they really like a house, but it turns out it's in an age-restricted community. My wife and I actually just looked at some houses this past weekend, and we said, do you have any other models available? They said, oh, yeah, just across the street. And they said, wait a minute. Thankfully, they said, I'm not sure you qualify. I don't think you're 55. I said, thank God you said that. I am not 55, not yet. And so we were not eligible. So it couldn't have been sold to us if we wanted it to, right? But understanding those 4 instruments that contribute to value is important. You mentioned about selection of appraiser. It's important. The appraiser, by the way, is independent, impartial, objective. That is by definition who the appraiser is. It is the complete opposite of the users of appraisal services. An agent, for example, a homeowner, they are the opposite. They are dependent, partial, and they are not objective, right? The appraisal is the act or process of developing an opinion of value on real property. And I highlighted opinion, Caeli, because that's exactly what it is. Now, it should be an opinion born out of facts, but nonetheless, that's the case. Now, you mentioned about communicating with the appraiser. And so when you look at the appraiser independence requirements that are outlined in the Federal Registry, this can look pretty daunting. And really, at the end of the day, what it's telling you is you can't do things to influence the appraiser, right? You can't threaten the appraiser that you're going to send them to the board, or you're not going to pay him, or they need to get this value or else, right? And that's really what the appraiser independence requirements are about. It doesn't restrict you entirely from asking the appraiser to do a few things. And that same statute that's in code says, look, a person, and by the way, look at the entities in the top paragraph, Caeli. It is the lender, the broker, the banker, the real estate broker, the AMC, an employee of the AMC, the consumer, or any other person with an interest in that real estate transaction can do these things, right? That's a lot of people and entities, in my opinion.
And
so that
just real quickly, John, AMC, for those of you that aren't familiar with that, it's Appraisal Management Company. And that is the third party in between us as the lender and the actual appraiser that takes the order. So just FYI, sorry, John.
No, and that's perfect. And that's where I come from. Class Valuation is an appraisal management company. So the things that you can ask for: consider additional and appropriate property information, provide further detail or support for the decisions that the appraiser made. For example, Caeli, why did they make an adjustment at this extent, and is there support for it? And then I believe the first step is actually the third, and that is to correct errors in the appraisal report. If in an ROV, reconsideration of value, you present some possible errors, so in other words, you missed the fireplace, as an appraiser, I've got to admit then to myself that I might have missed something else. And so that really starts the tone appropriately. So I've mentioned reconsideration of value, or ROV is the acronym for that. I'm an appraiser. I live in a world of acronyms, so I apologize, but that should be a name that's familiar to you. The administration currently and the PAVE task force that was appointed by the administration is looking at ways to make the reconsideration of value process easier for users of appraisal service, particularly consumers, and then that they have access to this. I prefer, when I'm sending data over for appraisers to consider, that I refer to them as sales, not comparables. And they should be settled sales. So they should be closed, not something that's active or pending. I wouldn't send MLS printouts for each of the requested sales, not for the appraiser necessarily to consider. They should have access to them, but do point out that maybe the MLS number that will help them find it easier and faster. A concise narrative explaining why you believe that the sales that are presented are better options for the appraiser, and also any information that you believe is incorrect. Now, Caeli, I said I would give you a couple of examples of things, but the first thing that I want everybody's attention on is just understanding the tools that are in front of you, which I think are good tools if you use them and you really filter through them. But things like Zillow, Redfin, Trulia, Realtor.com, they all offer their own opinion of value, for the lack of a better word. They're an estimate, right? A Redfin estimate, a Zestimate, whatever. I'm going to take you through two scenarios, but this is an easy one. It is a tract home in a subdivision. You can see here, depending on which one of those free services you pull up, you have a range between 345 and 375, right? And so, Caeli, I think that's a disparate number that you would even have take exception to. And certainly as a consumer, if I was looking at selling this house, I'm going with the agent who said 375, not the 345. And if it's somewhere in between, that property is either going to sit on too long on the market, or I'm going to sell it for less than market value, right? And so that is an easy one, because there's a lot of market data in a subdivision in a metro area like Phoenix. But now consider a more rural stock home, and this one is outside of Louisville, Kentucky. Now, this has a much larger variance at almost 32%, and you're looking at 296 versus 391 just in between Zillow and Redfin. Now, I suspect that all of them are wrong because they don't know a lot about this property. You might be surprised to know that this has 2 bedrooms and a bath on the upper level. There's dormers on the back side of this property. There is a walkout, fully finished basement. And then to the left of it, which is not pictured here and not captured by the local assessor, is a permitted 4-car garage with a workshop and an accessory dwelling unit above it. And I believe all of those probably contribute to value. So all of those estimates of value are probably considerably low. And again, you're looking for an appraiser to help you along. But if you're relying solely on these, it can be a bit of a challenge, Caeli. So I'm going to walk you through, I know that you're not in Arizona, but I'm going to use this as an example. And this is a typical appraisal that we would see. The subject property is a pretty standard 3-bedroom, 2-bath house at 2165 square feet. And then from the appraiser, we would typically see these kinds of sales. Now, we have a general tendency, those of us in the industry reading the report, we're looking at the sales price, which you see across the top line there at 480, 475, 565, and 505. Remember, the appraiser, unlike an AVM, so Redfin and Zillow and Trulia team, they're really taking the square footage and they're multiplying it against a CMA, the median price per square foot. As you can see here in a sales comparable grid for an appraisal, there's about 21 different characteristics that the appraiser is measuring market behavior with and adjusting for. And so remember that sales price of 480 might be different after adjustments. So always look to the bottom line, which is your gross adjusted sales price. So I know what we would typically hear is, I don't know how it came in around the 525 mark. We have the sale at 565. That would be one. What we can see here is after adjustments, we have a range that's pretty tight. In fact, we have a model match to the subject that sold for 480, but based on market conditions at that time and the fact that it didn't have a pool, et cetera, it adjusted upwards to about 522. Now, Caeli and team, this is the location map. I would always look at these, trying to figure out where they're located at in comparison to the subject property. That would be pretty typical. And they certainly, to the naked eye, they look like they're all reasonable substitutions for the subject property. But what we would see in an ROV, and just keep this in mind, it's not all, but typically what we would see is there's disappointment because the sales that were considered were these sales considered for pricing. You have a sales price at 624, 634, and 685. So again, how can we be so disparate from the 522, 525 mark? Well, we can see after adjustments based on these properties that they also adjust to that 522 to 527 range. So Caeli, this is a great example of one appraiser could come in at the 525 range. And if somebody else used these sales, they'd probably be in the 640 range, right? And that's a big difference for that price point. Now, what we can see as an appraiser, if we're performing our due diligence, is you see the blue sales were the original, the 3 sales were those considered in the ROV. There's a dotted line that marks a separation between builders. And while it's all in the same master plan community, they are different models and properties altogether. In fact, the median square footage of the homes south of that dotted line are 700 square feet larger than those above it. And the median sales price is 149,000 greater south of that line. So when you look at those, we know then there's a location difference. And so we would have to capture that. I hope that makes a little bit of sense for folks. When you are evaluating data, take a closer look for those model matches to the subject, see if those are meaningful, how recent were they sold. And then I can tell you, I click on the links to go through the photographs. Sometimes it's easier to tell what a property is not worth than it is to see what it is worth. And what I mean by that is if I look through the photographs and I look through the features of the subject property, and let's just say, for example, I don't see a pool, but then I go into each of the listings and they all have pools. Well, I know we don't have one, so it should be something less than. If I start looking at properties that are bigger, larger in square footage with more room counts and bath counts, and they sold for higher, I would expect to be something less than, and vice versa, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I got a quick follow-up question there,
Go for
John.
it.
So, as the layman on this side of things, we know, and what I'm taking away, a lot of what you've said is that we can't just take the price per square foot. If we do that, more often than not, we're gonna be either very disappointed or grossly surprised, right? The price per square foot really is not the appropriate way to value any property. The baseline, and obviously the closer the better, the newer the better, but is there kind of an easier checklist? And I know you're kind of going through it here, but for them to take notes and say, here are some of the primary things that we want to be looking for, like the age. I know square footage plays a role, but my understanding is more than anything, it's got to be like kind, right? I'll use an example of something that came up recently. It was a daylight ranch, and there weren't any daylight ranch comps anywhere. So the valuation of that property, the homeowner, and everybody always thinks they live in the mansion, right? You guys get that. I see it every day. More often than not, you think you're going to get a higher valuation than you end up getting. But the like kind piece is something that really is what they need to be paying most attention to. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I mean, you really want to, there's a good exercise I go through, Caeli, as an appraiser. I call the real estate agents, and when I'm looking at a specific subdivision, in this case, in this subdivision here in the Peoria area, I would actually go into the MLS. I'd notice the agents that farm the market, right? So those are the market participants I'm most interested in. They're going to tell you what's driving value, right? And so if I'm trying to figure out, hey, this is so weird, it's a golf course community, and it doesn't look like there's a price difference between golf course lots and those that are not on a golf course, right? Well, if I call the market participants and they go, in response to a question, they say, that's absolutely true, we never see it, buyers could care less. Well, then that makes sense to me. There's no adjustment warranted. But they're going to tell me what a particular buyer, a typical buyer for that property, is going to look for. So what is important to them? What you're talking about is we want the least amount of adjustments. Obviously, if you have a complete model match, sold at the same time period, didn't require any adjustments, that is our best sale to compare to, right?
Mm-hmm.
The more adjustments you see through these adjustment columns, that just means they're more dissimilar to the subject property, and so less likely a comparable, right? And you see that in this third comp on 70th Drive. Now, from a price per square footage, I like to go through this exercise when I go to a real estate broker's office. We're usually in a bullpen, Caeli, and so I'll say something like, does anybody have a CMA on your desk? And I don't want somebody to go produce one. I want them to go pull one that's sitting on their desk now. They hand it to me, and I start reading through the price per square foot. And when you have 221, 218, 277, 260, if those were more similar and the price per square foot method worked, then that number would be closer. And so it just starts to sound, or at least people start reading them and understanding just how different they are. The typical buyer doesn't just consider square footage, to your point. They're considering other things. Gee, what is it that I need? I don't care if it's 4 or 3 bedrooms, for example, if they're the same room count and one is a family room that I can convert, right? Or a den. Do I need a pool or do I want a pool? Do I need a 3rd car garage or not? And so these things all influence the typical buyer. And that is what the appraiser is trying to measure, is the behavior of the typical buyer for that market.
How does any of that change when, because you know that the group that we're talking to, we're investors. So those comments there, how does that change when the buyer is an investor and they're looking at, I guess in similar ways, who they're going to be renting to, who their tenant is going to be, but that doesn't change things from your point of view until we get into more of the rehab part of the conversation, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was going to investment properties next.
Cool.
And I know we're running short on time, but for investment properties, remember the buyer is behaving differently, right? If it's an investment property, they're looking for a return on their investment. They're looking for the maximum amount of rent that they can collect on a monthly basis, et cetera. And then obviously resale is important depending on when they're going to ultimately sell that property, if at all, right? Versus a buyer is looking for, I need a property that I can invest in. I don't want it to go down in value, but I need to live in it. There's a value in use in that regard. So you have to measure behavior differently. So if I'm looking at an investment property and you're looking to buy one, it's a duplex, a threeplex, a fourplex, whatever it is, then I'm looking for properties that are being purchased for the same reason. And you can use a single family like that too, right? So if Caeli, you're buying a single family home to rent it out, and I'm buying to live in it, I'm probably, if I'm doing an appraisal on your property, I want to look at more properties that have been recently sold and ultimately rented. And that is where that rent schedule comes in that you asked or provided me a version of it. And so the same principle applies here. You're looking for the most recent leases. You're looking for an adjusted monthly rent, and then ultimately the indicated monthly market rent after adjustments. And for investors, they're less focused on things like, I mean, they might be focused on condition and things of that nature, but less considerate of things like lot size, et cetera. They may be more focused on what's the room count, right? Particularly if you think like a duplex, right? Well, gee, if I have a 3-bedroom and a 2-bedroom duplex, will those rent for more than if I have a duplex that's 2 studios? And if I believe that's the case, then that's going to be my target property, and that's something that I'm going to be looking for. But you can see the same kinds of things here. Again, I mentioned those in investment property. This is a single family. It's not a duplex or a triplex, but it's there. And then you have the whole other discussion around investment properties that are short-term rentals. That is also a very different market. That is what we would call business income. I'm not suggesting it's a commercial property by any stretch, but it is different than passive income, which the IRS says passive income would be related to a lease. Lease would be tenant occupancy of 30 days or more. An Airbnb or a VRBO, something of that nature, short-term rental would not fall under that category, and then they would be considered business income. So we'd be looking at a very different spreadsheet for those properties.
And so I think there's probably a lot of interest in that, and maybe just if we have a few more minutes, maybe get into that just a little bit. Maybe we can take a few of the questions if that's okay, John. But the short-term rental income, in terms of how you guys are going to value what the monthly average income is that what this is? You're going to touch on that?
Yeah, I've just got a couple. So there was some policy changes that were introduced by the GSEs in 2018. And what they allowed was the income to be used for qualification purposes, right? And so for many lenders, they looked at it as, oh, well, then that has to show up on a 1007, the 1007 being this form. Well, the 1007 was never designed for short-term rentals. It is to develop an opinion of market rent, which is different than short-term rental income. And it's based on leases, not something less than. Right. So when you really dig deeper, the short-term rental income can be supported by things like tax history through a 1004 Schedule E, for example, on their personal tax returns. It could be the result of a rental history over the last year or two. And it could be off of other reports like an AirDNA rentalizer or something like that. But
so John, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I want to make sure I'm clear on this. So you will take, as an appraiser, let's say it's a refinance, for example, and this property has been used as a short-term rental. You will allow us to submit last year's filed Schedule E?
No, you would use that for qualification purposes.
Okay, but that's not, okay.
The appraiser really is stuck. Most appraisers are not equipped to develop an opinion of a going concern value, or better, I guess, phrased, they wouldn't report on short-term rental income. They don't have the knowledge base to do it, and they don't have access to the data. There's so much going on with the short-term rental, Caeli. You think of like if you're a super host in a 4-star versus a 3-star rating. And then that daily rate changes so wildly. You just take Peoria, go back to the house that I shared with you. In Peoria, the rental market is around 2,200 for a specific time period. But if I went and found, according to AirDNA, the short-term rentals, they were 3,500. Now, there was a 40% vacancy rate when they were short-term rentals versus somewhere around a 5% vacancy rate for leases, right? So all of those things factor in. So the best thing you can do is come prepared. If you are looking for short-term rental and looking for qualification, is for as much documentation to support the income that they're generating through that property.
And submit it with the order. Right. Because I've seen them. There are some, we do get pushback sometimes when we're ordering an appraisal for short-term rental, and we need that income statement. A lot of times the appraisers will say, no, I'm not doing that. I don't have either the skill set or the information or whatever. But then there's others that are accepting those orders and they are producing. So can you talk to that?
So again, remember going back to 2018, right? That's the changes. And so for many appraisers, they just thought this is easy. The market rent, right? The market is short-term rentals. Therefore, I'm just going to go find the other short-term rentals. I'm going to take that number, multiply it by 30. There's my monthly rent, right?
Okay.
That is not an accurate way to calculate that, but it was easy. The path of least resistance, that's what they're asking for. That's what I'll do. What you're seeing today is some awareness around short-term rentals. You're finding appraisers are getting themselves in trouble with their state regulators, being disciplined by their states. Their E&O providers can't defend them. They don't have the expertise or the competency to do what's being asked. And then they're really writing what we would call a misleading report. Remember, market rent is based on leases. 30 days. And so if you're reporting the STR income, I'll give you an example. An appraiser, I just saw it. He gave a $14,000 a month market rent for a property in Wisconsin. And when we called the appraiser, he said, well, it's rented out weekly. And it's rented out pretty much from Memorial Day to Labor Day, with a couple of days in the fall for hunting season and a couple of weekends in the winter for ice fishing. And I said, but you just gave it $14,000 of income per month. That was the market rent. Well, if you multiply the weekly rate times 4 and multiply that by 12 and then divide by, or whatever, right? That's the number. That's not an accurate representation of the income that property draws, right? They certainly on their tax returns were not generating $168,000 in income.
Okay. So is there any final thought on the short-term rental? Because it's, a lot of investors are making sure that they've got balanced portfolios, and that includes 1 or 2 or more short-term rental properties. And as it relates to qualifying with some of that income, is there any kind of overreaching?
I would just make sure you have, if they have proof of income, if you've, and see what the lender is willing to accept to prove income. We have some lenders that say, we just need, we need the 1007 to reflect leases and market rent. And then we need an AirDNA rentalizer report, for example, to demonstrate market rent, or we can use the last year of tax returns or 2 years, or some bank statements that show the income that's being generated from that STR. Yeah. Remember, the STRs are really a business ownership, right? Because they don't generally transfer with the property. Right. And they don't always stay with the property. I've got a friend who is debating, he has an STR in Nashville. He is the first owner. He can operate it as STR. If he sells it, the buyer can apply for a permit and they can operate it as an STR. If they ever sell it, it can never be operated as an STR again, right?
And those are the rules in that city or county or whatever.
So all jurisdictions have these different challenges. And so, that buyer is going to have to buy it, Caeli, right? I think we would all agree on this call for the long haul, right? Because they're not going to be able to sell it for that use.
So what I would share with you guys when we're talking about short-term rental income, and what I tell most of our clients about that, if the need for the income is necessary for them to qualify in the debt to income ratio space, is first and foremost, let's just start by baselining what a long-term rental income would look like on the appraisal. And if 75% of that number is enough, let's just call it. That's more than enough. We're good. We don't need to mess with it. Otherwise, we can start digging into what options we have, because John's right. We are noticing a lot more that the investors that we're selling our mortgage-backed securities to are allowing us more opportunities to provide certain documentation that will justify short-term rental income. You know, he mentioned several of them a second ago. So, but to start with, you guys, for your purposes, make sure that if you're buying a short-term rental and you know that your DTI is going to need at least some kind of income to offset the new mortgage payment, get the long-term estimated rental income from whatever sources that you're using now, and we can use that as our baseline prior to getting the appraisal, of course. And if we think it's closer enough, then we're good to go, and we don't have to have too much brain damage over it. Okay, so if it's okay, John, if we have a few more minutes of your time, how are we doing?
I'm good. I'm yours.
Okay. So let's go into guys, start asking your questions here, please. Let's go into a couple of questions here. I'm going to read Jag. Let's see here. I was told by a lender that the value would come in okay, even though rehab was still ongoing, since they were sharing the expected purchase price with the appraising company, and did even though the turnkey was not ready. Does that resonate with you? I'm not sure I'm understanding the question. Maybe I'll have Jag unmute and ask directly. Do you know what?
I'm not tracking. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So Jag, please.
Okay, I'm gonna, Jag, if you want to ask your question, let me unmute you, and you can answer. You can ask it directly, and we'll see if we can get you an answer. Where are you, Jag?
Hello, thank you so much.
Hi.
So actually, it was more of a comment. It's a turnkey that I've had. It's been my PhD in real estate, but when I was purchasing it, I was closing a 1031, and the lender said, "Don't worry, even though the rehab is only halfway there, I'm pretty sure, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, it'll all come in. We don't know. We generally use certain, 2 or 3 different appraisal companies, but the purchase price is shared on whatever is given to them, I guess, to do the appraisal. So generally, what we get back is the appraised value. So in a way, that was great for me because I had a 1031 coming. So it may, put my mind at ease knowing that, good, at least I can close the loan. But on the flip side, that turnkey company did not finish its rehab for 1 year after. In fact, it's still done a shoddy job. So I got, to put it politely, I got messed over pretty badly. And in a sense, had the appraisal been done on what was actually the status at that time, I couldn't have closed. I would have had to buy something else, but I would have been saved a year of pain. So it wasn't quite a question. It was more of a comment about a process, about safeguards, and I don't know, any comments? I guess it was learning experience.
Yeah, very, very valuable one, I'm sure, painful as it may have been, Jag. I know that John's going to have some comments too, but based on your description, it sounds like there were some things going on there that weren't within USPAP regulation. It seems a little disjointed to me. John, what would you say about that?
So I guess not knowing, this is one of those things where I would answer it depends, but not knowing how the lender ordered the appraisal. Did the appraiser complete it subject to, but those things were not repaired, and so therefore the subject to value wasn't appropriate? Were they supposed to appraise it as is? Those kinds of things. The purchase price is always a challenge. The GSEs have already reported multiple times, statistically speaking, that appraisers are more likely to appraise closer to purchase price than they would be on a refinance, because a refinance, they don't know what the estimated value by the consumer is. It's never shared with the appraiser. And I see Scott said, why are contracted sales prices disclosed to appraiser? Well, there's a couple of reasons why we would expect the appraisers to be closer anyways. There's a meeting of the minds. Presumably speaking, you have a buyer and a seller in an informed market making a decision on a contract price that they've agreed to. And so you'd like to think those two individuals got pretty close. And so the data is probably there to support that. So in that regards, were they closer to the purchase price because the contract was exposed? I would hope not. It should never be a target value. That using that as a target would be a violation of USPAP. The disclosure of contracted prices, I believe, Scott, you're talking about in the purchase and sales contract, the appraiser having access to it, et cetera. That is a safeguard that I don't know, the GSEs and banks have always asked appraisers to be the second look. You know, if I'm an appraiser and I'm reporting that I have a purchase price of $100,000, and oh, by the way, I have 6 pages to a purchase and sale agreement and there's no concessions offered. And then the lender is looking at a 12-page purchase and sale agreement. Well, why was the appraiser only provided 6 pages? Like, those are the kinds of safeguards that they would have in place. But the appraiser should also be analyzing that contract. And what they're really doing is also making sure things like personal property and things of that nature are not included in that transaction, at least not in the real property, right? If you're selling me a house, Caeli, for $100,000 and it includes I don't know, you name the car, it includes a new Ford Escape. Well, then really that $100,000 is for the house and the car, right? And so you'd want to take that into consideration. So,
and as lenders, we have issues with that. Personal property cannot be part of the contract, and certainly can't be part of the appraised value. So, you know, that's got to be, if there's something like that, I don't know, John, how you'd feel about me saying this, that goes off book. I mean, it's whatever 2 people agree to outside of a contract is up to them. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, if the real property is the home, right? So if the real property was actually worth $100,000, well, they got a car in exchange for nothing. My job is to report the value of the real property. So removing things like personal property, cars, or things of that nature, you see that, you know, you see things like golf course memberships and things like that. Those kinds of things are not part of real property.
But they'll put that stuff in contracts, really, because I know that back in the day when I was scrutinizing contracts myself, we would always make sure to tell agents up front, personal property has no place in this contract. Get rid of it. I don't want it in my contract. It's just going to muddle things for us and create problems.
And it can, yes.
Yeah. Okay, Michelle has a question. Is there best practice for looking at plus and minus percentage of square foot to compare properties?
Ooh, well, that's a good one, Michelle. I think, you know, a good appraiser is going to back out and then refine their search. So generally speaking, you'd like something to be within 10%, but I'll be honest with you, you know, if you're looking at a condo in Manhattan, you know, 100 square feet means a lot more than a suburban 6,000 square foot house in the Metroplex of Dallas, right?
Yeah.
100 square feet on a 6,000 square foot home means absolutely nothing in that regard, but 100 square feet means a lot in a apartment in Manhattan, right? So it should be within reason. And again, go back to what the typical buyer is looking for. And if you get into these exceptional homes, like we talked about a little bit earlier, you know, $1, $2, $5, $10 million homes, the individuals purchasing this homes are not purchasing based on square footage. They're not purchasing based on room counts. They're purchasing primarily based on location and view, right?
Yeah, right. Okay, I like this one, Mr. Cooper. I'm interested in the answer to this too. So the difference between an appraisal that's done, let's say I call you and say, hey, you know, I'm just, for my own edification, I want to know what my property is worth. Can you do this appraisal for me? So the difference between that versus one that's being ordered for the purpose of a loan, there shouldn't be any difference. I assume it's going to be your answer, but I feel like maybe he's thinking that there is, or that. How would you answer that?
I think it's a valid question, and I think it's a common question that's brought up to me. So you're correct, Caeli. There should be no difference. I mean, the difference should be the form used, the 1004 that you know today. That is used for a mortgage financial transaction only. Although we do see some appraisers using that for other types of appraisals, for listings in this example. Those appraisers are generally disciplined by their state for doing that because they have specific language about lenders and mortgage financing, right? Hard printed language that you can't remove. That being said, the form that they could use for a listing looks almost the same, but it's going to be different. All right, that's where the difference is. Other than that, the process, the principles and procedures used to determine opinion of value on real property remain the same. So it doesn't matter if I'm doing it for an estate, if I'm doing it for a listing appraisal, if I'm doing it for a refinance, or I'm doing it for a purchase, the process is the same.
I had a follow-up question to that. Oh, so as investors, in particular, when there's going to be rehab, whether it's minor or it's significant, because a lot of times the BRRRR method, right? I'm sure you're familiar with that acronym: buy, rehab, rent, refi. Do you think that there is value, a little or a lot, in them getting their own independent appraisal, which they know? And those of you that don't know this, I can't use that appraisal. I have to order it myself as the lender when you come back to us for the refinance. But is there any value other than, I guess, peace of mind, either way, of them doing that independently, finding an appraiser in the area that they go and get that valuation from?
Yeah, I mean, I actually used to work with a couple of let's call them fix and flippers, and they would revamp their punch list, if you will, their improvements that they were going to use, Caeli. And so they would just ask me. It was more of the appraisals were, hey, if we use these materials, if we make this kind of addition, so in other words, we convert the garage to living space, right? And all that kind of stuff. So we add the square footage. What is this going to do to the value of the property? And then they would make a decision. I mean, sometimes I did 2 or 3 appraisals. It was, what if we just do all these upgrades? What if we do all these upgrades plus an addition? What if we just fix it cosmetically? And then they would make a decision. Well, you know what? Let's just fix it cosmetically. That's our highest return.
Yeah. And then being able to use that. So let's say, I mean, I don't know if you can answer this, but you kind of touched on it earlier, but they get that appraisal, the last one that they did, based on the back and forth. We order as the lender the appraisal, which is a random selection, right? We have nothing to do with that. It's done. And the differences are huge. We can have that conversation, guys, the way that Scott detailed it earlier. We have to look at those specific differences, and maybe if there was something missed, and the condition and et cetera. Anyway, I don't want to beat a dead horse there. There's one more question here, and then I think we can say thank you so much. Can you elaborate on doing appraisals and comps for small multifamilies? Hi, Katia. 3 or 4 units, and if you can't find like comps in the direct area or in the last 3 to 6 months, what are the next sets of criteria to use? And I think I know the answer, but I'm going to see how smart I am. Go ahead, John.
Katia, that's a great question too. So again, when we're talking about 2, 3, and 4 family, assuming that that's where we stop, right? Anything more than that is a certified general, and that's an apartment or something of that nature, right? So 2, 3, 4 family, really the process is no different than a single family. With respect to how I'm looking for things, the proximity and the date of sale, those are all, those are guidelines that are kind of made up. They're not in the selling guides. They're not in the handbook 4001, et cetera. They're just based on the principle of substitution. But go back in the beginning when I said I was looking for a house and wasn't eligible because it was a 55 plus community. So I used to appraise in this community in Arizona that was 55 plus. I was a primary appraiser for it. I did most of the appraisals for listing, and then lenders also ended up hiring me, right? There were no other 55 plus communities that were close to it. Across the street, within a mile, that's what we're talking about, right? There were, they were non-adult plus communities, right? So they were just traditional HOA PUDs. Those are not appropriate sales comparables to use. And then, of course, nobody was exchanging these properties. So the date of sale could have been even longer, up to a year, maybe even more. In fact, a model match that's a year or 2 old might be my best comparable sale, for example. The lenders and underwriters aren't going to like that, right, Caeli? But it could be. And so what I do is, again, call the market participant. And I say, listen, if somebody wanted to buy in this 55 plus community, it has golf courses, everything, they don't have to leave it, and you don't have any available inventory, where do they go? And when the agent tells me it's 7 miles away and they tell me which community to go to, then those are my competing properties. Somebody might not like it, but I'm going to explain it, and I'm going to say the agents that farm the market indicate these are comparable to the subject property. Remember, again, every buyer is different. So those buyers, for example, didn't care how far they were from downtown Phoenix. They had everything at their hands. When it's related to a 2, 3, and 4 family, ideally I want the same properties, right? So I want, if it's a triplex, I want other triplexes, ideally. But if I can tell that the investors, the folks that are looking for a return on their investment are looking at the income, not the resale of that property, then the room count, bedroom count specifically, might be more important. And so I could use a duplex and a fourplex in comparison if, for example, I'm valuing the property on a per bedroom basis, right? Because I can just multiply that out. But again, if you see activity in the market that says there's a preference to a duplex over a fourplex or whatever the case is, then that may influence the opinion of value on the from the sales comparison approach. Does that make sense?
I think it did to me. Is it right? Am I right in my understanding that the triplex, just since we touched on it, is the least common of all the residential property types, and probably the least common in terms of comps to find? Is that an accurate statement?
I think that just depends on the market, Caeli.
Okay.
I mean, yes, presumably you generally see something as a 2 or a 4. I think that just duplexes are probably more prevalent than anything. And then 4 is probably, there's more 4s because of the limitations. Once you go past 4 units, you're now approaching, you know, apartment building and different zoning and restrictions, et cetera. So you know, really at the end of the day, when an investor is looking at building those, they're doing their own highest and best use analysis, hopefully getting the help of an appraiser, and they're trying to determine what's the appropriate number of rooms and what's the appropriate number of units.
Yeah. I got one more. I know I lied. One more. How much does an appraiser look into permitted versus non-permitted area on a property?
Another great question. So Fannie Mae, I think it was 2017, has an appraiser update. So that's their newsletters that go to appraisers on a quarterly basis. And they had permitted versus allowable. We could also say permissible. So those are 2 different words that get confused by appraisers and users of appraisal services all the time. Give you an example. In Phoenix, for example, we see garage or carport conversions frequently, depending on the neighborhood, right? They may not be permitted by the jurisdiction, but they're allowed. So the zoning would allow you to do it. They just didn't do it. Does it contribute to value? My job is to measure that contributory value. So Caeli and team, if, for example, and I'm just making numbers in a story up for the purpose of this, right? If the city of Phoenix said, you know, all we need is a retrospective permit and it's like $25, you just do it and we'll approve it, pretty much, right? Well, the potential buyer, the typical buyer for that property, is going to go, wait a minute. So I get all this extra space. It's not permitted today, but it's going to cost me $25 and somebody come out and visit the property and it's probably going to be included. I'm all for it. Let's just do it, right? However, if it's not permissible legally through zoning, that's a different issue altogether. So if you had to have a garage, then as an appraiser, I'm saying that is a garage, and whatever I'm adjusting what the market would say. Oh, Caeli's going to say, if I have to convert that back to a garage to make it legal, it's going to cost me X dollars to do it and the headache to do it and blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to discount that price, right? I'm going to offer John something less than what he's asking because it's going to cause these problems and headaches for me.
Down the road, yeah.
So again, it's permitted versus permissible are 2 different things. When we say permitted, that is some function of the jurisdictional authority to say that it's built to code or something of that nature. Again, something can be non-permitted but permissible legally under the zoning.
Yeah. So I think the answer there, guys, is check with the city. Call the city and find out what you can and can't do and be real clear about that, because whatever happens on the front end, you're going to want to know for the future and resale, or right, it could create bigger issues than if not. John, I owe you something, man. I don't know how I'm going to make this up to you, but I got something good coming your way. This was fantastic. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. Community folks, please send me your topic thoughts and ideas. I will record on those and get you guys some feedback. As always, we are here on standby. Anything you need, you know how to reach us, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Caeli. Thank you, everyone. Really
Guys.
appreciate it.
Thanks.